50 dumbest historical facts that are actually epic lies. You clicked because you're tired of the myths that have shaped your view of history. Well, get ready. What you've been told isn't just wrong, it's a series of massive lies. In the next few minutes, we'll shatter 50 of the biggest misconceptions ever, exposing the truth hidden beneath centuries of manipulation. This isn't some boring history lesson. It's a wake-up call. Stick around, because what you're about to hear will change everything. Chapter 1. Napoleon was short. The truth behind the height myth. You've heard it 1,000 times. Napoleon Bonaparte was short. It's become part of the global narrative, a punchline, and a symbol of his alleged inferiority. But here's the shocking truth. Napoleon wasn't short at all. In fact, he was about 5'7", which was average for a man in his era. So why does everyone think he was a runt? Simple. His political enemies needed him to look weak, and they spread this lie to destroy his image. Napoleon's enemies knew the power of perception, so they painted him as small in stature and even smaller in power. But this myth didn't just end with Napoleon's reputation. It took on a life of its own, spreading across generations, shaping the way we see him today. The truth? Napoleon's height had nothing to do with his success. It was all about the lies that history chose to believe. But this wasn't the only lie we've been sold. Stay tuned, because the next myth is even crazier. Chapter 2. Vikings wore horned helmets. The myth we keep wearing. When you think of a Viking, what do you picture? A fierce warrior in a horned helmet, right? But here's the truth. Vikings didn't wear horned helmets. This iconic image was created by 19th century artists and playwrights, and somehow it stuck. The horned helmets became a symbol of power, but the reality was far less dramatic. In truth, Viking helmets were simple, functional, and practical. Nothing like the outlandish headgear we see in movies today. The horned helmet myth is purely a product of artistic imagination, designed to make Vikings look more fierce and exotic. It didn't start as a mistake, it was intentional. And yet, the lie spread like wildfire, turning into one of history's most famous misconceptions. But this myth didn't stop with their helmets. The real truth about the Vikings is even more surprising, and the lies didn't end with their wardrobe. What's next is even more unbelievable. Stay tuned to find out. Chapter 3. The Earth was flat. A misconception. Debunked, you've probably heard it before, the idea that people in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. It's a story we've all been told, but it's one of history's biggest misconceptions. The truth. Ancient civilizations, from the Greeks to the Egyptians, knew the Earth was round long before Columbus set sail. So how did this myth take hold? It was perpetuated during the Renaissance to make people in the Dark Ages seem less intelligent. The myth was a clever way to make the past look backward and ignorant. By the time Columbus came around, educated people already understood the Earth's shape. But this lie wasn't just about science, it was about control. By spreading the idea of a flat Earth, powerful institutions kept people in the dark, fueling fear and ignorance. The real truth was buried, and it's time we dug it up. And just when you think it can't get worse, the next myth will blow your mind. Chapter 4. Salem Witch Trials, Mass Hysteria, or Political Agenda. The Salem Witch Trials, one of the most infamous chapters in American history. But here's the thing, it wasn't just about mass hysteria. Sure, fear and panic played a role, but there was something much darker at play. The truth? The trials were politically motivated and strategically timed. In 1692, the Puritan leaders saw a chance to eliminate their rivals. Accusing people of witchcraft became a convenient way to settle personal and political scores. The people targeted weren't just random villagers. They were often outsiders, or those who threatened the power structure. This wasn't a random outbreak of panic. It was a deliberate manipulation of fear for control. The accusations spread like wildfire, fueled by power struggles and the need to maintain dominance. The trials ultimately ruined countless lives, all in the name of preserving political power. But this was just the beginning. Stay tuned, because the truth behind the next myth will shock you even more. Chapter 5. Cleopatra's Beauty. More than a mythical legacy. Cleopatra's beauty is legendary, but it's also a myth carefully crafted by history. We've been taught to think of her as a stunning seductress who charmed powerful men like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But the truth goes much deeper. Cleopatra wasn't just a pretty face, she was a political genius. The Roman Empire spread her image to justify her relationships with powerful men, making her seem like the ultimate femme fatale. In reality, she was known for her intellect, her ability to speak multiple languages, and her unmatched political acumen. She used her charm, but it was always for the strategic gain of her throne and her people. The myth of Cleopatra's beauty was manufactured to diminish her true power. She wasn't simply a love interest, she was a ruler who wielded influence and intelligence in a male-dominated world. The truth behind her image is far more complex than we've been led to believe. But what's coming next? You'll be even more stunned when you hear about the real discoverer of America. Chapter 6. Columbus discovered America. The truth of early exploration. Columbus didn't discover America. The land he stumbled upon was already inhabited by millions of indigenous people. The myth that Columbus discovered America has been ingrained in history, but the truth is much messier. The Vikings, led by Leif Erikson, reached North America almost 500 years before Columbus. Yet Columbus's journey in 1492 paved the way for European colonization, which devastated native populations. The real story is about the impact of European exploration, not the discovery of land that was already known. Columbus was merely a pawn in a much larger, brutal push for empire building. His discovery wasn't groundbreaking. It was the beginning of centuries of exploitation and violence. This myth about Columbus's heroism has been propagated for centuries to justify colonization, but the real truth is that it was a catastrophic event for indigenous peoples. And if you thought this was bad, wait until you hear about the so-called Dark Ages. Chapter 7. The Dark Ages. A time of progress, not stagnation. We've all heard it. The Dark Ages. A period of ignorance and stagnation. But this narrative is entirely false. The truth? The so-called Dark Ages were actually a time of cultural and scientific progress, particularly in the Islamic world. While Europe faced political turmoil, cities like Baghdad thrived with advancements in science, medicine, and philosophy. The myth of the Dark Ages was created to paint the Middle Ages as a time of barbarism, conveniently erasing the intellectual achievements that were happening. In fact, this period saw important innovations in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine that laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. The myth of stagnation is a lie designed to make the past look backwards. The truth? Humanity was still making significant strides, even if we only remember the violence and political upheaval in Europe. But this isn't the only myth we've been fed. The next one will blow your mind. Chapter 8. The Great Wall of China. A barrier to more than just invaders. The Great Wall of China is often viewed as a symbol of defence against invaders, but the truth is more complex. While it certainly served as a barrier, its real purpose was political control. The wall wasn't just about keeping enemies out, it was about controlling people within the empire. The Chinese emperor used the wall to maintain authority over the northern frontier, keeping out rebel groups and consolidating power. The myth of a wall built solely to defend against invaders erases the fact that it was also a tool to reinforce imperial power and keep the vast Chinese empire intact. It wasn't just a military structure, it was a symbol of imperial control, designed to keep both enemies and the common people in check. But the lies don't stop there. The next myth takes us to the heart of religious warfare. Chapter 9. The Crusades. Religious war or political power grab? The Crusades are often seen as holy wars to reclaim the Holy Land. But the reality, they were as much about politics and power as they were about religion. The Church used the Crusades to extend its influence and wealth across Europe and the Middle East. The Pope promised divine reward for those who fought, but the real motivation was control over land, resources, and the spread of Christianity. Leaders used the Crusades as a way to gain more power and control over their territories. The myth of religious zeal was manipulated to serve political agendas. These wars weren't just about defending the faith, they were about securing political power, land and wealth in a rapidly expanding Christian empire. But what if I told you the most famous quote from history wasn't even true? Stay with us. Chapter 10. Marie Antoinette's "Let them eat cake," a revolutionary lie. let them eat cake. This phrase has become synonymous with Marie Antoinette, the French queen. But here's the truth. She never said it. The quote was invented by revolutionary propagandists to portray her as out of touch with the suffering of the French people. The myth served to fuel outrage against her and the monarchy, helping to justify the French Revolution. In reality, Marie Antoinette was not the callous, disconnected queen we've been taught about. She was a woman trapped in a system that was beyond her control. The phrase was used to inflame anger against her, turning her into a symbol of aristocratic excess. In truth, she was far more sympathetic to the plight of the French people than history has led us to believe. And just when you thought it couldn't get more twisted, here comes the next myth. Chapter 11. King Arthur. A real leader or a romanticised fiction? King Arthur is a figure of legend, a symbol of chivalry and bravery, but the truth, he may never have existed. The King Arthur we know is a collection of stories, myths, and historical figures combined over centuries to create an idealised version of leadership. The legend of King Arthur was built over time, mixing real leaders like the Celtic warlord Riothamus with fictional elements, resulting in the story of a noble king who defended Britain from invaders. But Arthur's existence is far from proven. The myth served to promote ideas of honour, chivalry, and leadership, but the truth behind Arthur's legend is far murkier and much more complex. But hold on, this next myth is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about architecture. Chapter 12. The Leaning Tower of Pisa. A mistake turned icon. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is one of the world's most iconic landmarks, known for its dramatic tilt. But did you know the tilt wasn't originally planned? The tower was designed to be straight, but the ground beneath it couldn't support the structure, leading to the now famous lean. Instead of correcting it, the builders decided to embrace it. Over time, the tilt became a symbol of the tower's uniqueness. The mistake became a feature, and rather than fixing it, the architects worked with the tilt to preserve the structure. What started as a construction flaw became an international symbol, proving that sometimes embracing imperfection can turn a problem into a triumph. But this was only a minor error compared to the next myth. Let's dive into the real story behind the American Revolution. Chapter 13. The American Revolution. More than just a fight for freedom. The American Revolution is often portrayed as pure struggle for liberty and independence, but the truth is more complex. While the desire for freedom from Britain played a major role, economic and political factors were just as important. The revolution was as much about controlling trade routes and securing land as it was about resisting British taxation. The colonists wanted more autonomy, not just from Britain, but from the economic and political systems that tied them to the old world. It wasn't purely about the moral high ground, it was a battle for power, wealth, and resources. The revolutionaries sought more than freedom. They wanted to secure their place in a rapidly changing world, but that's just the beginning. The next myth takes us into the world of wartime myths. Chapter 14. World War I. A single spark or decades of tension. World War I is often thought to have been sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but that's a gross oversimplification. The war was the result of decades of political manoeuvring, military alliances, and rising tensions between empires. The assassination acted as a catalyst, but the real causes were deeply rooted in the competition for power, resources, and influence across Europe. The war was an inevitability. Years of build-up finally reached a boiling point, and the assassination was just the spark that ignited the conflict. The myth of a single cause doesn't capture the true complexity of the war's origins. The tensions were there long before the gunshot rang out in Sarajevo. But as the war escalated, so did the myths surrounding the Wright brothers. Let's set the record straight. Chapter 15. The Wright brothers. Who really took flight first? The Wright brothers are credited with inventing the airplane, but they weren't the only ones vying for the title of first in flight. Figures like Gustav Whitehead and Samuel Langley were also pioneers in the field of aviation, yet their contributions have been overshadowed by the Wright brothers' success. In truth, Whitehead may have flown before the Wrights, but their aggressive patenting strategy and media campaign ensured their place in history. The myth that they were the first to achieve powered flight is more about marketing and legal battles than groundbreaking invention. It wasn't just about who flew first, it was about who controlled the story of aviation history. But the real twists keep coming. The next myth will change everything you thought you knew about World War II. Chapter 16, Socrates' Trial, a political plot against a philosopher. Socrates is remembered as a martyr for free thought, condemned for corrupting the youth of Athens. But the truth behind his trial is darker. It wasn't just about his philosophy, it was about political power. Socrates was seen as a threat to the established order. His criticisms of Athenian democracy and the influence he had over young men made him a target. His trial was a political move to silence dissent and maintain control. Socrates wasn't executed because he was a philosopher, he was executed because he challenged the powerful elites of Athens. And if you think this political plot is surprising, wait until you see the next myth. Chapter 17, The Sinking of the Titanic. Sabotage or simple tragedy. The sinking of the Titanic is one of history's most tragic events, but did you know there are theories it wasn't just an accident? Some claim that the Titanic's sinking was actually part of a sabotage plot, with some suggesting that rival shipping magnates orchestrated the disaster to eliminate competition. While these theories are mostly speculative, the more conventional story is no less shocking. The Titanic sank because of a series of catastrophic mistakes, including insufficient lifeboats, poor design, and overconfidence in its unsinkable reputation. But the true cause, a deadly combination of arrogance, greed, and failure to heed warnings. The myth of the Titanic as an unsinkable marvel didn't just mislead the public, it set the stage for a tragedy that could have been avoided. The truth behind the disaster is a stark reminder of the dangers of ignoring reality. But the Titanic wasn't the only thing sinking. The next myth will hit hard. Stay tuned. Chapter 18, The Davy Crockett Myth. Hero or Hollywood invention. Davy Crockett is often remembered as a fearless frontiersman, the quintessential American hero. But what if the man behind the myth wasn't quite as heroic as we've been led to believe? The truth is, much of Crockett's story was embellished by writers and Hollywood. While Crockett did serve in the US Congress and fought at the Battle of the Alamo, his persona as a rugged, larger-than-life hero was created by 19th century media to sell books and shows. The reality was more complicated. He wasn't a relentless adventurer, but a man trying to navigate a complicated political landscape. The myth of Crockett as a simple, brave man of the frontier oversimplifies his true story, turning him into a figure of pure legend. In reality, Crockett was far more complex and far more human than the image we've come to accept. But Crockett's story is just the beginning. Next, we'll uncover an ancient mystery that's been hidden for centuries. Chapter 19, The Rosetta Stone, a simple discovery or the key to ancient power. The Rosetta Stone is often hailed as the key to unlocking ancient Egyptian writing. But did you know the true story of its discovery is much darker than we're told? The stone was discovered by French soldiers during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, but it wasn't just an academic breakthrough, it was a symbol of imperial conquest. The myth surrounding the stone's discovery often paints it as a scholarly treasure, but its recovery was tied to European colonial ambitions. Napoleon's army didn't just find the Rosetta Stone, they seized it as part of a broader effort to exert control over Egypt's rich history and culture. The truth is, the Rosetta Stone wasn't just a linguistic breakthrough, it was part of a larger power struggle. And what's more, the story of how it was acquired is a reminder of how history can be manipulated by those with imperial motives. The lies don't stop there. The next myth involves a revolutionary document. Chapter 20, The Magna Carta, a victory for all or a political bargain. The Magna Carta is often celebrated as the foundation of modern democracy, a document that guaranteed the rights of English subjects. But here's the shocking truth. It wasn't about freedom for all. It was a political manoeuvre to keep King John in power. Signed in 1215, the Magna Carta was the result of pressure from rebellious barons who sought to limit the king's power. It was never intended as a charter for the common people. It was a document designed to protect the privileges of the nobility. The rights it granted were mostly for the elite, and many of its clauses were about ensuring the stability of the monarchy. The myth of the Magna Carta as a beacon of democracy is just that, a myth. The document was a temporary political tool, not a revolution for the common people. But don't get too comfortable, because the next myth is even more troubling. Chapter 21. The Black Death, Superstition versus Scientific Explanation. The Black Death wiped out millions in the 14th century, but the way people understood it was far from accurate. For centuries, many believed the plague was God's punishment or the result of witchcraft. In reality, the Black Death was caused by fleas carried by rats, an explanation that took far too long to surface. The myth of the plague's divine punishment fueled fear and superstition, leading to violent witch hunts and scapegoating of minority groups. People believed the disease was a sign of divine wrath, which made it harder to control and prevent. But the real cause was far more mundane: bacteria spread by fleas, which wasn't understood until centuries later. The myth of divine retribution distracted people from the real cause of the disease and delayed the development of effective treatments. The truth, hidden for so long, makes us realize how much history has been shaped by ignorance. But this next story will have you questioning the very nature of disappearance. Chapter 22. The disappearance of the lost colony of Roanoke. The mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke has baffled historians for centuries. The myth suggests that the settlers vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the cryptic word Croatoan carved into a post. But the truth is likely less mysterious and far more complicated. The settlers didn't disappear. They likely integrated with nearby Native American tribes after a failed attempt to establish a permanent settlement. Supplies ran out, and without reinforcements, the colony was forced to survive in desperate conditions. They probably merged with the local tribes, and the disappearance wasn't as sudden or eerie as history suggests. The myth of the lost colony has been romanticised and turned into a haunting mystery, but the real story is much more mundane and connected to the hardships of early colonisation. But wait, there's another myth about a historical figure that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Chapter 23. The Legend of Pocahontas, a romanced myth of colonial history. Pocahontas is one of America's most famous historical figures, but much of her story has been distorted to fit a romanticised narrative. The myth tells of a young, innocent girl who saved Captain John Smith, only for their love story to end tragically. The truth is far more complicated. Pocahontas was not the childlike heroine we've been taught to believe. She was a young woman caught in the middle of colonial tensions, and her relationship with John Smith was more about diplomacy than romance. She was eventually kidnapped, converted to Christianity, and used as a symbol in Britain to justify the colonisation of America. The romanticised myth of Pocahontas ignores the exploitation and manipulation she faced, turning her into a symbol of peace and love rather than a victim of colonial violence. But this isn't the only myth about the so-called good colonisers. Stay tuned for the next one. Chapter 24. Vikings more than raiders. The untold truth. Vikings are often depicted as ruthless, bloodthirsty raiders, but the truth about their culture is far more complex. While they certainly engaged in raids, they were also skilled traders, farmers, and craftsmen. The myth of the violent Viking oversimplifies their true nature. The Vikings didn't just come to pillage and destroy, they were explorers and settlers who established far-reaching trade networks across Europe and Asia. The idea of the Viking as a savage warrior was popularised by later romanticised depictions, but it ignores the fact that they played an integral role in shaping early European civilization. By focusing solely on their violent side, we've missed out on understanding the full depth of Viking culture and achievements. But hold on, this myth is just one of many that have been blown out of proportion. The next one will be even more shocking. Chapter 25. The Man in the Iron Mask. A royal secret. The mystery of the Man in the Iron Mask has fascinated people for centuries. Some believe he was a royal prisoner, hidden away to protect a secret that could shake the monarchy. But the truth behind his identity is far more mundane. The Man in the Iron Mask wasn't a royal heir. He was likely a political prisoner, kept in isolation to prevent him from causing trouble. The mask was more about keeping him anonymous and controlling the narrative, not about hiding some grand royal secret. The myth of the Iron Mask has turned a simple prisoner's story into one of intrigue, but the truth is that he was just another victim of political power struggles. The mystery? It's just a product of legend. But if you thought that was outrageous, wait until you hear the next myth. Chapter 26. The Alamo, a battle with political motives. The Battle of the Alamo is often romanticised as a heroic stand against overwhelming odds, but the truth is more politically charged. The Texan fighters were not just defending freedom, they were fighting for control and independence from Mexico. The myth of the Alamo as a selfless battle for liberty ignores the fact that many of the fighters were landowners looking to break free from Mexico's rule. The loss at the Alamo became a rallying cry, but the reality was that it was more about the politics of Texas independence than a noble stand for freedom. The myth of the Alamo has been used to fuel political movements ever since, but the truth is far more complex and tied to the interests of those fighting for power. But this political myth is just the beginning. The next one will take you deeper into history's manipulations. Chapter 27. The Secret of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar have been shrouded in mystery and legend, with stories of hidden treasures and secret knowledge. But the truth is far less glamorous. The Templars were primarily a military and banking order, with little to do with the mystical secrets we've come to associate them with. The myth of their hidden treasure and power grew over time, fueled by rumours and conspiracy theories. In reality, the Templars were simply a powerful organisation that operated within the constraints of medieval Christianity. Their supposed secret knowledge and treasures were exaggerated to make them seem more mysterious and dangerous than they actually were. The Templars weren't hiding ancient secrets. They were just part of a much larger political and religious structure. But the myths of history are far from over. The next one will leave you questioning everything. Chapter 28. The Spanish Inquisition, a religious tool for control. The Spanish Inquisition is often remembered as a dark chapter of religious persecution. But it wasn't just about faith. It was about power. While many think it was a force for religious purity, the truth is that it was primarily a tool used by the Spanish monarchy to control the population and consolidate their power. The Inquisition was more about eliminating political rivals, silencing dissent, and keeping the monarchy in control than it was about enforcing religious orthodoxy. By targeting Jews, Muslims, and later Protestants, the Inquisition not only shaped religious beliefs, but also political allegiances. The myth of the Inquisition as purely a religious endeavour ignores the complex web of political manoeuvring that made it a tool of state power. It wasn't about saving souls. It was about maintaining a centralised, unchallenged authority. But what happened next would expose even more of the lies surrounding ancient history. Chapter 29. The Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon's final defeat or his biggest mistake. The Battle of Waterloo is often portrayed as Napoleon's final, inevitable defeat, the moment that sealed his fate. But the reality, it wasn't as simple as that. Napoleon's defeat wasn't just about military failure. It was about a series of bad decisions that had been building for years. Napoleon's downfall started long before Waterloo. His empire was overstretched, and his enemies were united against him. The final blow came at Waterloo, but it was the result of years of miscalculation, poor strategy, and the exhaustion of his army. The myth of Waterloo as a moment of ultimate collapse oversimplifies the complexity of his decline. Napoleon didn't lose because of a single battle. He lost because of his broader strategic mistakes, his underestimation of his enemies, and his growing inability to maintain control over his empire. The next myth, however, will challenge your perception of early female leadership. Chapter 30. Cleopatra or Hatshepsut, the first female pharaoh. When we think of powerful female rulers of Egypt, Cleopatra often comes to mind. But what if I told you Cleopatra wasn't the first woman to rule Egypt as pharaoh? That honour goes to Hatshepsut, who ruled Egypt almost 1,000 years before Cleopatra. Hatshepsut's reign is often overlooked because later rulers and historians, including the famous Cleopatra, overshadowed her. Hatshepsut ruled successfully for over 20 years, stabilising Egypt, expanding trade routes, and commissioning monumental building projects. Cleopatra, while an iconic figure, became the symbol of female power in Egypt. While Hatshepsut's achievements were largely erased from history, intentionally or not. Hatshepsut didn't just lead, she ruled as a king, adopting masculine imagery and titles to maintain her authority in a male-dominated society. The myth of Cleopatra as the first female pharaoh ignores the legacy of Hatshepsut, whose reign was one of Egypt's most prosperous. Next, we'll unravel another myth surrounding a fallen empire. Chapter 31. The Fall of Rome. A slow decline, not a sudden collapse. The fall of the Roman Empire is often depicted as a sudden, dramatic collapse. One day, Rome was at the height of its power, and the next, it was in ruins. But the truth is much more complex. The fall was slow and drawn out over centuries. Rome didn't collapse in a day. It eroded gradually, weakened by internal corruption, political instability, economic decay, and relentless invasions from barbarian tribes. The myth of Rome's sudden fall overlooks the centuries of decay that led to its eventual downfall. The reality is that the Roman Empire was in decline long before it officially fell. The myth of an immediate collapse simplifies a much more nuanced story of gradual disintegration over hundreds of years. Rome's decline was a slow, painful process, but this myth pales in comparison to the next one, which will change everything you think about American history. Chapter 32. The Boston Tea Party, political stunt or defiant act. The Boston Tea Party is often remembered as a bold, defiant act of rebellion against British tyranny. But what if it was more of a calculated political stunt than an impulsive protest? The truth is, the Boston Tea Party was as much about political manoeuvring as it was about resisting British taxes. The colonists involved in the Tea Party were not just angry citizens. They were savvy political actors who saw an opportunity to rally support for independence. By destroying the tea, they struck a blow against the British East India Company, which was economically connected to the Crown. The myth of the Boston Tea Party as a spontaneous revolt overlooks the careful planning behind the event, which was designed to galvanise the colonists and further their political agenda. It was more than an act of defiance, it was a pivotal moment in the fight for control over America's future. Next, let's uncover the myth surrounding one of history's greatest conquerors. Chapter 33. Genghis Khan, a brutal conqueror or a visionary leader. Genghis Khan is often remembered as one of the most brutal conquerors. In history, a ruthless leader who slaughtered millions. But the truth about Genghis Khan is more complicated. He wasn't just a savage warrior, he was a visionary leader who unified disparate Mongol tribes into one of the largest empires in history. While his campaigns were undeniably violent, Genghis Khan was also a brilliant strategist and an innovative ruler. He established a legal code, promoted trade, and respected different religions within his empire. His empire was built not just on bloodshed, but on organisation, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The myth of Genghis Khan as a purely brutal force of destruction ignores his accomplishments in governance, trade, and diplomacy. His empire's success wasn't just due to military might, it was his leadership vision that allowed it to flourish. But that's not the only myth we're about to dismantle. The next one will make you question everything you know about Islamic history. Chapter 34. Golden Age of Islam. Science, not myths. The Golden Age of Islam is often romanticised as a bridge between antiquity and the Renaissance, a period of great scientific and cultural advancement. But much of its legacy is overshadowed by myths about its role in preserving knowledge. The truth. The Islamic world during the Golden Age was not just preserving ancient knowledge, it was advancing it. Scholars in the Islamic Empire made groundbreaking contributions in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. They didn't just safeguard the works of the Greeks and Romans, they expanded on them, making discoveries that would shape the future of science. The myth of the Golden Age, as a mere intermediary between cultures, ignores the innovative spirit that defined it. The Islamic scholars of this era were trailblazers, not just caretakers of the past, but hold tight, what's coming next will shape the very foundations of modern conspiracy theories. Chapter 35. The Roswell Incident. UFOs or military cover-up. The Roswell Incident is the most famous UFO sighting in history, but the truth behind it might not be as otherworldly as we've been led to believe. For decades, The myth of a crashed UFO and alien bodies in Roswell has captivated imaginations. But the reality is more mundane. What crashed at Roswell in 1947 was likely a secret military balloon used for surveillance. The US government's hasty cover-up fueled rumours and conspiracy theories, but the story of aliens was a result of misinterpretation and sensationalism. The myth of UFOs and extraterrestrial life gained momentum because of the government's initial mishandling of the incident. Instead of simply acknowledging the military project, the cover-up created a perfect storm for UFO enthusiasts to build their theories. The truth? The Roswell incident was a case of military secrecy gone wrong, not an extraterrestrial encounter. What's next will challenge your understanding of power and history. Chapter 36. Empress Wu, the true legacy of China's only female emperor. Empress Wu Zetian is often portrayed as a ruthless and manipulative ruler, but her legacy is far more nuanced. While some histories cast her as a power-hungry woman who murdered to claim the throne, the truth is more complex. Wu Zetian was a highly effective and ambitious ruler who brought stability and prosperity to China during her reign. She expanded China's borders, promoted economic growth, and even opened up opportunities for women in government. She wasn't just a puppet or a villain. She was a strong, capable leader who navigated the treacherous world of imperial politics. The myth of Wu as a villain overlooks her accomplishments. Her reign was one of the most prosperous in Chinese history, and her leadership left a lasting impact on the country. But this next myth is one of history's greatest mysteries, and it will leave you speechless. Chapter 37. The Mona Lisa. The truth behind her smile. The Mona Lisa is one of the most famous paintings in the world, but the truth behind her smile has been the subject of endless theories. Some say it's a reflection of Renaissance beauty ideals. Others claim it hides a deeper secret. The truth: Leonardo da Vinci may have deliberately left the smile ambiguous to create a sense of mystery. The Mona Lisa's expression is designed to evoke different emotions depending on the viewer's perspective. It wasn't meant to be a simple portrait of a woman. It was a work of art meant to provoke thought. The myth of the Mona Lisa's smile as a symbol of feminine beauty is simplistic. In reality, it was a brilliant artistic choice designed to engage and intrigue viewers, challenging their perception of the human experience. But that's not the only mystery left to unravel. The next myth will take us deep into the heart of World War II. Chapter 38. The Battle of the Bulge, a Nazi resilience myth. The Battle of the Bulge is often seen as a heroic stand by Nazi forces, but the truth is far more complicated. While the Germans did launch a surprise counteroffensive, in December 1944 their army was already on the brink of collapse. The myth of Nazi resilience at the Bulge ignores the fact that the German forces were exhausted, outnumbered, and facing logistical collapse. The battle was less a dramatic comeback and more a desperate last-ditch effort to delay the inevitable. The Allies quickly regrouped and pushed back, sealing Germany's fate. The myth of the last stand at the Bulge inflates the narrative of Nazi strength. But the reality was that Germany was already on the brink of defeat. Their forces had little hope of winning. It was just a matter of when, not if, the war would end. The truth behind this final stand will make you rethink the entire narrative of World War II. Chapter 39. The Wright brothers. Who really took flight first? The Wright brothers are often credited with inventing the airplane, but they weren't the only ones vying for the title. Gustav Whitehead, an aviation pioneer, claimed to have flown his aircraft 2 years before the Wright brothers' first flight. So why have we only heard of the Wrights? The truth behind flight isn't as clear-cut as history tells us. The Wright brothers' success was not just a matter of innovation, but also aggressive patenting and legal battles. They fought fiercely to claim the title of first in flight, sidelining other contenders like Whitehead. While the Wright brothers made historic contributions to aviation, the myth that they were the first is tied to a legal and commercial victory, not pure invention. Their role in history was cemented through the right combination of timing, money, and patents. But this aviation myth is just one of many. Wait until you hear about the real story behind D-Day. Chapter 40. D-Day, a single moment of victory or a longer strategy. D-Day is often remembered as the defining moment of World War II. the Allied invasion that marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. But the truth is more complicated. The D-Day landings were not just about storming the beaches, they were the culmination of years of strategy, deception, and planning. The myth of a single heroic moment obscures the vast efforts that led up to the invasion. The Allies had been preparing for D-Day for years, with Operation Fortitude, a massive deception campaign, misleading the Germans into thinking the invasion would happen elsewhere. The landing was not a sudden triumph, it was a well-coordinated, multifaceted strategy. D-Day wasn't just a victory, it was part of a larger, intricate plan that required months of preparation, international coordination, and deception. The truth behind it is far more nuanced than the simple narrative of a heroic landing, but the myth of war doesn't end here. Let's take a closer look at the Battle of Stalingrad. Chapter 41. The Battle of Stalingrad. A tragic turning point. The Battle of Stalingrad is often seen as a heroic turning point for the Allies during World War II, a battle that broke the back of the German army. But the truth? Stalingrad was far more than just a military victory. It was a testament to the immense human cost of war. The myth of Stalingrad as a decisive military turning point overlooks the staggering loss of life on both sides. Over 2 million people died in the battle, and the suffering of the civilians trapped in the city was catastrophic. The Germans were defeated, but at an unimaginable cost. The battle wasn't just about strategy, it was about survival, resilience, and the brutal realities of war. While Stalingrad may have marked the beginning of the end for Germany, the truth is that the price paid by all involved was horrific. But this myth is far from the only story of destruction. The next chapter will leave you questioning history itself. Chapter 42. Great Pyramids, Alien Technology or Ancient Ingenuity. The Great Pyramids of Egypt have sparked endless conspiracy theories, with some suggesting they were built with alien technology. The truth is far less mysterious, but just as impressive. The pyramids were built using advanced knowledge of engineering, mathematics, and labour management by the ancient Egyptians. The myth of alien involvement ignores the fact that the Egyptians had the resources, the organisation, and the innovation to build these monumental structures without outside help. They used simple tools, complex planning, and a massive workforce to achieve what was once thought impossible. The idea that aliens helped build the pyramids distracts from the incredible achievements of ancient civilizations. The truth is that humans, not extraterrestrials, were behind these masterpieces of architecture. But this isn't the only time history has been rewritten. What follows will challenge everything you thought you knew about the samurai. Chapter 43. The Myth of the Samurai. Honour or aristocratic propaganda. The samurai are often portrayed as noble warriors, paragons of honour and discipline, but the reality behind the samurai is more rooted in aristocratic privilege than the myth of honour. Samurai were part of the feudal military class in Japan, not a group of selfless warriors. The myth of the samurai as honourable defenders of the people ignores the fact that they were also landowners, political figures, and military leaders who fought to maintain their privileged status. The image of the samurai as noble defenders of the weak was a later creation to romanticize feudalism and solidify the power of the ruling class. Samurai honor was often about loyalty to their feudal lords rather than a commitment to universal justice. The myth of samurai nobility has been exaggerated to promote the ideals of the ruling elite. But if you think the samurai were just about power, wait until you hear about the secret of the Sphinx. Chapter 44. The secret of the Sphinx. What's really inside? The Great Sphinx of Giza has long been surrounded by mystery and speculation. Some claim there are hidden chambers inside, containing ancient treasures or lost knowledge. But the truth, the Sphinx has been largely ignored by historians who focus more on the pyramids, leaving its true purpose and construction shrouded in mystery. The myth of hidden chambers was likely fueled by later explorers, eager to find something spectacular within the Sphinx. However, after extensive excavation, no such chambers have been found. The truth behind the Sphinx is less about secrets and more about the incredible ingenuity of ancient Egyptian builders. The Sphinx, while still an architectural marvel, was built to honour Pharaoh Khafre. Its mystery lies not in hidden treasures, but in the symbolism it holds about Egyptian kingship and divinity. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Get ready for the most outrageous myth yet. Chapter 45. D-Day Invasion. Myth or triumph? D-Day is often seen as the heroic moment that tipped the scales of World War II in favour of the Allies. But the truth, it was part of a broader, intricate strategy involving deception, preparation, and immense sacrifice. The landings at Normandy were only a small piece of the puzzle. The myth of D-Day as the turning point ignores the crucial role of Allied intelligence, the coordinated deception campaigns, and the massive logistical effort that made it possible. D-Day wasn't just about landing on the beaches. It was about the months of planning and misdirection that preceded it. The truth behind D-Day is that it wasn't a single moment of victory. It was the result of years of cooperation, strategy, and ultimately human sacrifice. The myths surrounding D-Day often oversimplify the monumental effort it took to launch the invasion and secure victory. The real story, it's about time you heard it. Chapter 46. The Barbarian Vikings. More than just savages. The Vikings are often remembered as ruthless raiders who terrorised Europe. But the truth? The Vikings were skilled navigators, traders, and settlers. They didn't just pillage and destroy, they built trading networks that stretched from the Middle East to North America. Their reputation as bloodthirsty savages has been exaggerated, obscuring the fact that they were also pioneers of exploration and trade. The myth of the Viking barbarian is a misrepresentation that overlooks their accomplishments in shipbuilding, culture, and diplomacy. Chapter 47. The myth of Christopher Columbus' heroic voyage. We've all heard about Columbus's brave journey to the Americas in 1492. But the truth, Columbus didn't exactly discover a new world. Indigenous peoples had been living in the Americas for millennia, and other explorers, like the Vikings, had already reached the continent long before him. Columbus's so-called discovery wasn't an act of heroism. It was part of a larger European colonial project that would lead to centuries of exploitation, violence, and destruction for native populations. The myth of Columbus as a fearless adventurer ignores the catastrophic consequences of his voyages for the indigenous people. Chapter 48. The myth of the glorious Spartans. More than just warrior idealism. The Spartans are often celebrated as the epitome of warrior culture. Brave, disciplined, and heroic. But the reality, Spartan society was built on extreme oppression, with helots, serfs working the land under brutal conditions. The Spartans' military prowess was maintained through an intense system of control and violence. While they were indeed fierce warriors, their society was also heavily reliant on subjugating others to maintain their status. The myth of the Spartan as a noble, heroic figure fails to acknowledge the dark side of their culture, a system that thrived on fear and cruelty. Chapter 49. The bloodthirsty. Aztecs, civilization or savagery. The Aztecs have often been depicted as bloodthirsty savages who performed human sacrifices to appease their gods. But the truth, the Aztecs were an advanced civilization with achievements in astronomy, architecture, and agriculture. While they did practice human sacrifice, it was often part of a complex religious and political system, not a sign of barbarism. The myth of the bloodthirsty Aztecs oversimplifies their culture and ignores the sophisticated nature of their society. What history often overlooks is that these rituals were deeply ingrained in their worldview and were a reflection of their understanding of the universe. Chapter 50. The myth of the Dark Middle Ages, a time of intellectual growth. The so-called Dark Ages have long been portrayed as a time of stagnation, ignorance, and superstition. But the reality? The Middle Ages were far from dark. In fact, this period saw significant intellectual advancements, particularly in the Islamic world. Scholars in the Middle East made groundbreaking contributions in mathematics, medicine, and philosophy that would influence the Renaissance and shape modern science. The myth of the Dark Ages was largely constructed by Renaissance thinkers to paint the Middle Ages as a backward period. But in truth, it was a time of both cultural achievements and dramatic shifts in power and thought. Final payoff. History is full of myths, lies and deceptions that have shaped our understanding of the past. From Napoleon's height to the fall of the Roman Empire, we've been fed a version of history that often ignores the truth. These lies weren't accidental. They were carefully constructed, spread, and embraced for centuries to control narratives, justify actions, and manipulate perceptions. But now, the truth is out. The real stories behind these myths reveal a much more complex, fascinating, and often shocking history than we've been taught. History is not just about facts, it's about the stories we choose to believe and pass down. By exposing these lies, we can start to understand the real forces that shaped our world. And as we peel back the layers of deception, one question remains: how many more myths are we still believing? The truth is out there. Are you ready to face it?